Leadership. A word we hear almost every day, but one we rarely see in its truest form. What makes a leader? Is it power, wealth, age, or is it something deeper, sacrifice, courage, and vision? This is the story of a man who shocked the world. A man who defied the odds and redefined what it means to lead. His name is Ibrahim Traoré. Rising from a modest background and a young military career, he became the youngest president in the world. But his story is not just about politics. It's about timeless lessons that every generation can learn from. Today, we break down the 7 leadership lessons of Ibrahim Traoré, lessons that echo across history and may even inspire the next great leader. Every true leader in history has faced the crossroads, a moment where comfort whispers, stay safe, but courage demands, take the risk. For Ibrahim Traoré, that moment came in 2022. Burkina Faso was collapsing under waves of terrorist attacks. Villages were being destroyed, families were displaced. Ordinary people lived in fear. And yet the government in power seemed helpless, paralyzed, or unwilling to act. Traoré was only a 34-year-old captain in the army. He could have stayed silent, followed orders, and continued his career. He could have chosen the safe path, the path of comfort. But true leadership is never born in silence. In September 2022, he and his allies made their move. Against overwhelming odds, they seized power, ousting a government that had lost the trust of the people. It was risky. It could have failed. He could have been killed or imprisoned. But he chose courage over comfort. This echoes throughout history. Think of Nelson Mandela, who walked out of prison after 27 years with courage instead of bitterness. Think of Winston Churchill, who stood against Nazi Germany when all of Europe seemed ready to surrender. Leaders are defined not by how safe they play the game, but by how boldly they face danger. Lesson 1. A true leader chooses courage over comfort, even when the price is high. Leadership is often misunderstood. Many think it means ruling over people, issuing commands and enjoying privileges. But Traoré flipped this idea upside down. For him, leadership meant service. While many African leaders spent fortunes abroad and lived in luxury, Traoré focused on his people, the farmers tilling dry soil, the workers struggling for survival, the soldiers fighting on the front lines. His speeches weren't polished performances for foreign media. They were messages directed at ordinary citizens. He spoke directly to villages, towns, and communities who felt abandoned by the world. This is not new. History's greatest leaders always understood this principle. Mahatma Gandhi wore the clothes of the poor and walked with them. Abraham Lincoln spoke with the honesty and humility of a farmer. Traoré lived simply, ate modestly, and stayed close to his roots. He wanted to prove through action that his mission was not to rule above the people, but to serve among them. Lesson 2. Leadership is not measured by how high you stand, but by how much you lift your people. When Traoré became president, he was just 34 years old, the youngest head of state in the world. Critics scoffed. Too young, they said, too inexperienced. But history tells a different story. Alexander the Great had conquered much of the known world before the age of 30. Joan of Arc led armies in France as a teenager. And more recently, leaders like Thomas Sankara, another Burkinabe icon, proved that young leaders can carry a vision bigger than their years. Traoré understood something many older politicians had forgotten: the struggles of the young. He wasn't detached from the frustrations of his generation. He was living them. He knew what it meant to grow up in a nation torn by insecurity and poverty. Age did not matter. Vision did. His speeches echoed with themes of self-determination, unity, and hope for a new Africa. He reminded the world that the power of leadership lies not in years lived, but in dreams pursued. Lesson 3. Leadership is not defined by age. It is defined by vision. The true test of a leader comes when pressure mounts. And for Traoré, that pressure came quickly. Foreign governments, international organizations, and powerful nations all wanted a say in Burkina Faso's future. Aid was offered, but with hidden strings. Threats of isolation loomed. Many expected the young leader to bend. But Traoré stood firm. He refused to let Burkina Faso become a puppet of foreign powers. He emphasized independence, dignity, and sovereignty, even if it meant walking alone. This was not an easy path. Choosing independence often means sacrificing short-term benefits. It means risking economic pressure, political isolation, even hostility. But as Traoré reminded his people, freedom cannot be begged. It must be claimed. This echoes the words of Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's founding father, who once declared, "We prefer self-government with danger to servitude and tranquility." Lesson 4. A true leader must stand strong, even when the world demands they bend. The most powerful leadership does not come from words, it comes from actions. Traoré rejected the luxuries of power. He continued dressing as a soldier, eating simply and working closely with his people. While other leaders demanded respect, he earned it. History is full of leaders who understood this principle. George Washington refused to be crowned king. Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam lived in a simple wooden stilt house even as president. Their humility became their strength. For Traoré, leading by example was not just symbolic. It built trust. His people saw him not as a ruler above them, but as one of them, and that trust became the foundation of his leadership. Lesson 5. A leader's greatest power is the example they set. Burkina Faso, like much of Africa, carries the scars of colonialism. Borders drawn by outsiders divided tribes and languages. Decades of external interference weakened national pride. But Traoré spoke of unity. He reminded his people of their shared identity. He reignited pride in being Burkinabe, in being African, in standing tall without apology. This was more than politics. It was psychology. When people believe in themselves, they can achieve the impossible. When they see their identity as strength, they rise above division. Lesson 6. Leadership is not only about policy, it is about restoring pride and identity to your people. The lessons of Ibrahim Traoré are not just for Burkina Faso, they are for all of us. In America, where young people feel disillusioned by politics, Traoré proves that youth can lead. In Europe, where trust in leadership is collapsing, his example shows that service must come before self-interest. In Asia, where rapid development often overshadows identity, his message of pride and independence is a reminder that culture and dignity must never be lost. Leadership is universal. The principles are timeless. Ibrahim Traoré's story is not just about politics. It is about courage, sacrifice, and vision. It is a reminder that true leaders do not wait for the perfect moment. They create it. And that brings us to the final question. What about you? Because leadership is not reserved for presidents or soldiers. It begins wherever you are, with your family, your friends, your community. The world is desperate for leaders who are fearless, selfless, and visionary. Ibrahim Traoré is one example, but the next leader could be you. In the heart of West Africa, where the red soil carries the weight of centuries of struggle and resilience, a young man rose to power in a way few could have predicted. His name, whispered in streets, shouted in rallies, and debated in parliaments, was Ibrahim Traoré. But this is not just the story of one man. It is the story of leadership, courage, and the lessons the world can learn when a 36-year-old soldier steps onto the world stage and dares to redefine what it means to lead. When he appeared before his people for the first time as head of state, the world barely knew him. He was not a household name like Nelson Mandela, not a billionaire like Elon Musk, not a war-hardened president like Vladimir Putin. He was in many ways an unknown, but within weeks his speeches would spread across continents, translated into dozens of languages, shared millions of times online. Why? Because he spoke with something rare, fearless honesty. Imagine the scene, a crowded stadium in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. The air is thick with dust. Chants echo through the night, and the young leader steps forward. Cameras zoom in. For a moment, silence. He begins to speak, not from a script, not from polished political notes, but from conviction. He calls out the hypocrisy of global powers. He questions the exploitation of Africa's resources. And he does so not with anger, but with piercing clarity. It is here that the first leadership lesson emerges. True leaders are not defined by age, but by courage. Throughout history, age has been both weapon and shield. Critics dismissed him as too young, too inexperienced, too reckless. But Ibrahim Traoré turned this criticism into strength. He reminded his people and the world that youth is not weakness. It is energy, it is vision, it is the refusal to accept a broken system as normal. Napoleon Bonaparte rose to power at 35. Alexander the Great conquered much of the known world before 30. And now in the 21st century, Ibrahim Traoré carries that same aura of urgency, that change cannot wait. The second lesson comes from his insistence on sovereignty. In one of his most quoted speeches, Traoré declared that Burkina Faso would no longer bow to foreign interference. His words hit like a thunderclap across Africa. For decades, the continent had been painted as dependent, fragile, always in need of outside aid. But here was a leader who dared to reject that narrative. To the youth of Africa, it was electrifying. To the halls of power in Europe and America, it was unsettling. Leaders are often tested not by their promises, but by the risks they are willing to take. And Traoré's risk was enormous, standing against global powers without flinching. As his speeches spread online, one could see the reactions. In New York coffee shops, university students debated his words. In Paris, African diaspora groups carried his face on banners. In Nairobi, youth leaders echoed his message of dignity and independence. And in Ouagadougou, the capital he swore to defend, Citizens felt pride surge through them, pride many thought had been lost. This reveals the third great leadership lesson, the power of narrative. Great leaders do not just govern, they tell a story that people believe they are part of. Traoré's story was simple. Burkina Faso will no longer be silent. But the journey of leadership is not without danger. His rise was marked by turbulence, conflict, political instability, threats both internal and external. Critics predicted his downfall within months. Some said he would be another fleeting figure in the endless cycle of African coups. Yet every time doubt surfaced, Traoré countered it with action. He tightened security, built alliances with neighboring countries, and openly declared that his loyalty was not to foreign powers but to his people. That stance, though risky, gave him credibility. Leadership, after all, is not about avoiding storms, it is about standing firm in the middle of them. As the months unfolded, comparisons grew louder. Commentators asked, is Ibrahim Traoré Africa's Che Guevara? Is he the next Thomas Sankara? The revolutionary icon of Burkina Faso, who also rose young and defied colonial powers? Or is he carving his own path entirely? A leader for a digital age where messages spread faster than armies move. In those comparisons lies another lesson. Leaders must embrace history without becoming prisoners of it. Traoré invoked Sankara's spirit. Yes, but he also reminded people that every generation must write its own story. The world began to watch closely. His speeches reached the United Nations, where even seasoned diplomats raised eyebrows. His words carried no diplomatic sugarcoating. He spoke of justice, of dignity, of Africa's right to control its own future. And when he did, it wasn't just Africans who leaned in, it was youth worldwide. From the streets of Cairo to the avenues of London, young people saw in him what they craved: authenticity. This leads us to a crucial lesson. In an era where polished lies are common, raw truth is revolutionary. But authenticity alone is not enough. To lead is to make choices, and choices come with consequences. Traoré knew this. Every time he rejected foreign dictates, he risked sanctions. Every time he empowered his military, he risked alienating allies. Yet he pressed forward. Leaders are often remembered not for their easy decisions, but for their hard ones. And in those hard moments, he showed another timeless lesson. Leadership is about sacrifice. The camera cuts again to his people. A market woman, holding a basket of mangoes, tells a reporter that for the first time she feels hope. A young student says he wants to become a soldier, not out of fear but out of pride. These small voices, barely captured by microphones, reveal more than any headline. Because leadership is not just what you declare on stage, it's what echoes in the daily lives of those who follow you. And yet perhaps the most striking lesson from Traoré's story is his ability to balance defiance with vision. Too often, young leaders fall into one of two traps: reckless rebellion or blind conformity. He chose a third path: calculated defiance. His vision was not destruction but reconstruction. He didn't just say no to exploitation, he said yes to sovereignty, yes to dignity, yes to the empowerment of Africa's youth. This is why his speeches shocked the world, not because they were loud, but because they were clear. But leadership, as history has shown, is never a straight road. It is a battlefield of choices, betrayals, sacrifices, and victories. Ibrahim Traoré, standing before his people, understood this with a clarity that belied his age. He knew that the world was watching not just his words, but his every move. And yet, in that pressure, he found strength. Because true leaders are not those who hide from the gaze of history. They are those who stare back and refuse to blink. One cannot fully understand his lessons without stepping back into the shadow of Africa's past. For centuries, foreign powers carved up the continent as if it were a map on a table. Gold, diamonds, oil, and now uranium, all extracted while the people who lived on the land were left in poverty. Every generation had been promised freedom, yet every generation had seen it slip away in chains of dependency. It is within this context that Ibrahim Traoré rose. His leadership lesson here was profound. You cannot lead your people forward unless you understand the weight of the chains that held them back. When he spoke to the youth of Africa, he did not speak in abstract theories. He spoke in the language of lived struggle. He pointed to empty schools where children should be learning. He pointed to barren fields where farmers should be thriving. And he pointed to military bases not of his own nation but of foreign powers planted firmly on African soil. His words struck a chord because they were undeniable truths. This then is another lesson. Leadership is not about painting illusions. It is about holding up a mirror to reality, no matter how uncomfortable it is. And reality was uncomfortable indeed. Threats loomed at every turn. Insurgencies raged in rural areas. Terrorist groups exploited chaos. Economies strained under inflation. Any other leader might have chosen compromise, accept foreign aid, bow to pressure, buy temporary peace. But Ibrahim Traoré rejected the easy path. He told his people that dignity without sovereignty is an empty gift. He reminded them that the fight for freedom is never handed down from above, it must be claimed, fought for, and defended. This was not just rhetoric. The young captain began to reshape his nation's alliances. He looked not to the old colonial centers of power, but to new partnerships with neighbors, with nations that respected sovereignty, with movements that shared his vision. His decisions, though controversial, revealed another leadership lesson: sometimes to build, you must first break. He broke ties that had long kept his nation dependent. He broke traditions of silence that allowed exploitation. And in breaking, he began to rebuild something new. The world, however, does not forgive such boldness easily. Whispers of plots and pressure began to circle. Commentators speculated about his future. Would he survive? Would his government crumble? Would he fade into history as another failed revolutionary? These questions swirled not only in global capitals but in the minds of his own people. Yet his response to doubt was always the same: action. He increased agricultural reforms, urged young people to take pride in the land, and launched initiatives to make Burkina Faso more self-sufficient. It was here that his fourth great lesson emerged. Leadership is not just about speeches. It is about building something real, something lasting. Consider the example of Thomas Sankara, often called the Che Guevara of Africa. He too had risen young. He too had defied global powers. And he too had inspired millions. But his leadership was cut short by betrayal, and his dream was left unfinished. Traoré understood this history better than anyone. He knew the dangers, yet he chose to walk the same path. Not because it was safe, but because it was necessary. Leaders must sometimes plant seeds knowing they may not live to see them grow. And then came the speech that shook the world. Standing before international leaders, Ibrahim Traoré did what few dare to do. He told them to their faces that Africa was no longer theirs to command. His words carried no hesitation, no apology. He declared that Africa would rise on its own terms. And when the video of that speech spread across the globe, millions watched in awe. Some celebrated, others bristled, but none could deny it. A new voice had entered the global stage. This speech, dissected by analysts, replayed by news anchors, and shared endlessly online, held within it the essence of his leadership philosophy. Lesson 5: great leaders know when to shock the system. For too long, international gatherings have been filled with the same recycled promises, the same empty words. His speech broke that cycle. It reminded the world that Africa was not silent, not invisible, and certainly not powerless. But here lies a paradox. To inspire the world, a leader must first inspire at home. And Traoré understood this with laser focus. He spent as much time among his people as he did on podiums. He walked among farmers, spoke with soldiers, and listened to mothers in crowded marketplaces. Leadership, he showed, is not about building walls between rulers and ruled. It is about breaking them down. His humility, even in moments of power, became a lesson in itself. True leadership is service, not status. The cameras that followed him often captured something subtle yet powerful. He did not surround himself with the trappings of luxury. He did not bask in endless parades or golden palaces. Instead, he projected simplicity. And in that simplicity was a message louder than any slogan. I am one of you. For people who had grown weary of corrupt elites living above them, this was revolutionary in itself. But the story of Ibrahim Traoré does not end with one fiery speech. If anything, that was only the beginning. Because leadership is not measured by a single moment. It is measured by what follows. And in the months after that speech, the true test began. Challenges multiplied. Sanctions threatened his nation. Foreign media painted him in colors of doubt. Some called him reckless, others dismissed him as inexperienced. But every time such criticism surfaced, he doubled down on his commitment to sovereignty. He reminded his people that the road to independence was never meant to be easy. This too is a lesson. Leaders are not defined by the comfort of applause, but by the resilience they show in the face of criticism. In villages, his name began to carry new weight. To the young, he was proof that age was not a barrier to power. To the poor, he was proof that their struggles were finally being voiced at the highest level. To the powerful, he was a warning that the old order was beginning to crumble. And to historians, he became something rarer still, a living example of leadership in its rawest form. It is here that we uncover one of his deepest teachings. Leadership is not about waiting for the perfect conditions, it is about shaping imperfect conditions into something new. Most leaders wait until they are seasoned, safe, and surrounded by years of preparation. But Traoré showed that when the moment calls, courage must outweigh hesitation. And sometimes history favors those who dare to leap before others even take a step. Consider the global stage at the time. Around the world, leaders faced crises, wars, pandemics, economic collapse. Many resorted to familiar strategies: negotiation, compromise, and in some cases silence. But when Traoré stepped onto that stage, he chose confrontation. Not the kind that seeks destruction, but the kind that seeks awakening. His speech was a jolt to the system, a reminder that leadership is not always polite, and truth is not always comfortable. The youth of Africa, connected by smartphones and social media, replayed his words again and again. Memes spread, hashtags trended. In an age where attention spans are measured in seconds, his message cut through like lightning. This was another critical lesson. Leadership in the modern world is not confined to podiums. It must resonate across screens, across borders, across generations. He mastered the digital battlefield as effectively as the political one. But what makes this truly remarkable is that his vision was never just about himself. He did not speak in the language of I. He spoke in the language of we. He positioned himself not as the hero of a story, but as a chapter in a much larger book, the story of Africa's rebirth. And that shift of perspective may be his most enduring legacy. Because true leaders do not create followers. They create more leaders. His message spread beyond Burkina Faso. Across Africa, students debated his words in universities. Farmers in distant nations nodded in agreement. Activists quoted him in their protests. Even those who disagreed with his politics could not deny his influence. And here lies another leadership lesson. Great leaders spark conversations even among their critics. They cannot be ignored because their ideas carry too much weight to be dismissed. As time passed, whispers of danger only grew louder. Some feared that his defiance against powerful nations would make him a target, just as Sankara had been decades before. The shadow of assassination, coup, or foreign interference loomed large. Yet he carried himself with the same calm determination as if he had already accepted the risks. In doing so, he taught one final lesson, that leadership is not about personal safety, but about the willingness to risk everything for something greater than oneself. And so, when we look at Ibrahim Traoré, what do we see? Not just a soldier, not just a president. We see the embodiment of leadership in its purest form. Leadership that challenges, leadership that sacrifices, leadership that inspires. His story is not finished and its ending remains unwritten. But what he has already given the world is undeniable. A vision of what is possible when courage meets conviction. The question now is not just what he will do next. The question is what we will do with the lessons he has laid before us. Will we too have the courage to speak truth to power? Will we too resist the temptation of silence when justice is on the line? Will we too dare to build futures that others say are impossible? Because the legacy of Ibrahim Traoré is not his alone. It belongs to everyone willing to learn from it. He has shown us that leadership is not bound by age, not bought by wealth, and not granted by titles. It is earned every day through the choices we make and the courage we carry. And maybe years from now, when history looks back on this moment, it will not just remember a speech that shocked the world. It will remember a generation that listened, that rose, and that carried his lessons forward. Because true leaders do not live forever, but their words, their vision, and their courage can echo through time. And that is the final lesson. Leadership is not about power. It is about legacy.